What's cracklin', everybody? Welcome back once again to the definitive cereal tier list, where each episode we take a cereal, put it on the tier list, so you know how good it is. I'm your host, Tucker. In this episode, we're doing Zucaritas. Looking at this box, you might recognize our friend Tony here, because from my understanding, this is just the Spanish version of Frosted Flakes. So I'm curious to see if it is actually kind of different, because I've heard in the past for like I think it was tropical Fruit Loops, they were like kind of different in different regions, and I happened to see this in another one at my local Walmart that were the Spanish versions, so I thought it could be fun to see how they compare. The original Frosted Flakes is at an A, first day we gave, so pretty high ranking cereal. And I guess it is worth noting we have had the multi-meal version of Frosted Flakes that was nowhere near as good, but I expect this to be much closer, if not just on par at the minimum with original Frosted Flakes, because it's the same company, same tiger and everything, just regional difference. So we'll see how it goes. But let's just get into it. They look like Frosted Flakes. They pretty much smell like Frosted Flakes. Okay. So yeah, this seems pretty normal, in line, again, to be expected. I don't know if it's just my brain trying to find a difference, but there are a couple pieces that look like they're a little more like plastered, where it's not as it's a bit more dusty on American Frosted Flakes. And there are pieces like that, but there are some that seem it's a bit more of a glaze. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that happens sometimes with Frosted Flakes. So I don't know. Okay. So that slightly more glazed aspect does seem noticeable, especially texture-wise at the beginning. But overall, this is pretty much the exact same Frosted Flake you'd expect, besides that slight tweak. Not doing a ton to really change the flavor, at least in that first bite. We'll see how it continued on. So I am finding that the slightly more glazed nature of the Zucaritas is changing both the texture and the taste a little bit. I think early on it's much more noticeable in the texture, while it's still dry and have that pretty solid Frosted Flake Zucaritas type crunch going on. But as it starts to sogify, pretty much the exact same as Frosted Flakes do, then it becomes a little lesser, and you notice the taste change a little more. Or overall, I think it's still the same base flavor. It just feels a bit more condensed in spots, maybe. Where if it's like if you have like a cookie or something where there's a spot that's kind of like a thick glaze of the icing, and you can kind of tell the difference there between just how you have a normal bite, you'd be like, okay, and then you have another one, and it's like, okay, this is a little bit more intense, there's a bit more like break in the bite. Break with like a snap, not like a pause. So it's very similar, but there's just a couple tweaks here. That's kind of interesting. All right, we've reached the bottom. Let's see how it tastes. I expect it to be a bit less sweet than Frosted Flakes, just because it's not as powdery here, but we'll see. No, I'd say it's still pretty sweet. It has that like slight taste difference that the piece has seems a bit more accentuated here. Yeah, it almost feels like there's another aspect to the flavor now. Yeah, it's reminding me more of like a icing or like a true like glazed thing. That's kind of interesting. Still pretty solid, but I was correct. Different than Frosted Flakes, but it might actually be equally sweet, just different taste. By the end, this ended up being a bit more different than I expected. I'm pretty glad this ended up being a bit more different from the Frosted Flakes I grew up with, just because I think that makes it a bit more interesting to put on the list instead of just being, yep, pretty much the same thing, put in the same spot. This one I think changes up enough that you can have a bit more of a argument for which one you think is better. Me personally, I think I prefer the ones I grew up with. Could just be the bias of having grown up with it, but I think I like the powdery version of the flavor just a bit more and how that mixes with the milk versus the more glazed aspect that this one has. It keeps a little more on the piece with this one being glazed, but base piece wise, I think it'll get to the same point at roughly the same speed where you're just getting mostly flake and it's become fairly soggy at the end. So that part's not much of a difference. It seems it's just how the frosted aspect took place. So it's kind of interesting. So what I'm going to do is give Zucaritas a B. I think it's, again, not as good as normal Frosted Flakes, but I think it's a more interesting thing and a little better than the multi-meal ones at a C. So kind of ends up right between them. I think you could make an argument for preferring this one over the normal one if you are a bit more into that sort of glazed take on the flavor. It just didn't work that way for me, so it's going to be just below. But I'm definitely glad I happened to find this because it's, again, said like 3 times now, an interesting thing to taste. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. In the comments below, post your general thoughts. Let me know if you've had Zucaritas and what you think about them. I imagine most people haven't had both Zucaritas and Frosted Flakes, but if you have had both and you have your own sort of comparison between them, feel free to let me know. If you're someone who's grown up with Zucaritas instead of Frosted Flakes, I'd be interested to hear sort of your take on things, see if you also notice the more glazed aspect of it, or like how I grew up with a more powdery, like sprinkled version, and that's what I'm used to. Maybe you've grown more accustomed to the glazed version. I'd be interested to hear about that too. But until next time, stay delicious.